Hey there. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I videoed. I need to get on a more regular schedule. I've been traveling a little bit. I know that comes as a shocker for those of you who have been watching my videos. As always, this is for entertainment purposes. This story is my own through my lens, through my opinions. And others probably have their own sides of the story, but I'm going to tell it through my lens. For those of you who watched the Master Rebus video, I had mentioned that the link for his eco village would be coming. And so now I have that, and I'll put it in the description for this video for those of you who are interested. You'll also see me looking at my outline in this video because this part of the journey is complicated to describe. I want to be thorough but succinct. Fair warning for some of you, in this video I talk about my experience with both verbal and physical abuse, along with my process of healing. So it may trigger some of you, so use your discretion in listening to this. It won't be for everyone. Okay, on to the video. So for those of you who have been following the history and the healing journey, after the retreat, I increased my meditation and tried to hike every day. This was in Costa Rica, Cahuita, my favorite place. And I talked about arriving there in the last video. Not only because I increased my meditation did I start to get my downloads, as I like to call them, about the seeds of this channel, Global Divine Alchemy, but also I realized what shadow work was, and I needed to do my own huge shadow work to heal. I had talked about Master Rebus asking me at the retreat, what brings me joy? And I couldn't answer it. And so I really needed to make space for the light, if you will. And I had a lot of work to do. I needed to dig up those icebergs and those repressed feelings that were causing me pain and actions and reactions without me even knowing. I was handling things in my life from a place of not being my best self to myself, and I wanted to be better and do better. So I realized I needed to follow up on self-love, and the first step with that, true to who I am, I tackled one of the biggest ones on purpose. An act of rebellion, I guess, to feeling sad and rejected and hurt and devastated. I was just gonna tackle this shit, no holds barred. I had complicated my relationship with my father, and though I thought I had healed it over the years, I realized that I still had some work to do. So again, I'm gonna tell you this through my lens. He was loved by everyone outside the family, and honestly, he was one of the best teachers that I've ever seen. He was pretty much a legend. I always remember, he's passed now, I always remember kids who were always at our house, sitting on our porch, the troublemakers, if you will, of the school. And he really listened to them and helped them, and he truly did. In fact, the outpouring of love of how many lives that he changed was really a tribute to that when he passed away. A student from 20 plus years ago drove overnight to be there. That's really the kind of effect he had on lives. But at our house, it was different. He was verbally and physically abusive. I could tell a million stories about his dark and his light. And I'm just going to share a few of them for context, for understanding the process of healing from this on both sides of him. One of the things, and I'm not going to go in any particular order, one of the things that I remember is we were playing basketball. We played sports as kids, and he did too. He was a great athlete. And he was picking on, well, in my words, picking on one of my first boyfriends, if you call it. I think it was in the 5th grade. And his teaching someone to do better was being a little bit hard on them. It did make you better sometimes, to be honest with you. But I could tell the person was getting more and more devastated. And so on the basketball court, I said something, I don't even remember what I said, but it's okay, ignore him, or it's okay, something. Well, when we went home, he was livid, and he punched me and gave me a fat lip. Now, that wasn't different. That wasn't normal. He was, not always physically abusive, but he was pretty physically abusive. And so I remember it was on a holiday on Thanksgiving, and it was the first time ever that he said to me, particularly, hey, you don't have to go with all these families if you don't want to. And I remember being like, oh, I absolutely want to go. Again, this was fifth grade. And honestly, in my head, I never wanted to be at these holidays with the other families. I found them boring. But in this case, I was determined to tell the truth every single time someone asked me. So, long story short, we went, and I remember walking up the stairs, and the first adult who came across me asked me what happened. And so I told him, my dad hit me. They didn't say anything. And I'll be honest with you, I was devastated that I went, because not one more adult asked me that question, nor did they do anything about it, side note, as an adult. But that was one of the most, that's one of the memories that came to mind when I was reviewing this. Another memory that came to mind was my mom was quadriplegic. At the time that I'm telling this story, she probably was able to use her hands a little bit, but she was quadriplegic as her multiple sclerosis evolved. And so I remember her in the bathroom, and she fell off the toilet. I'm not sure what happened. And again, this is as a child. I can't even tell you the age I was. But I remember her being on the floor and couldn't get up. And I remember myself and my brother wanting to help her get up. And my dad made us leave her there and leave her there and leave her there. And I remember her crying, and she couldn't get up by herself. And so I think we left her there for about an hour. And then my brother and I devised a plan to distract my dad, so my brother could sneak in and help her. We finally got her up off the floor, but I just remember it being just devastating. Another story that I recall when I think about all the different shenanigans is, and I'm just trying to give you context, is my dad used to work on the car a lot. Now, he taught us a lot about cars. I can't fix them, but I can tell you what's wrong still to this day. And so we had a long hallway of tools. And I mean, we didn't know what the tools are. I mean, when I say long hallway, I mean think long hallway, and then like 4 or 5 shelves. And it was filled with tools. And I remember he would say, go get me the blah, whatever the blah was. And so I remember just me and my brother again shaking because we were so scared. We'd be running outside to say, is this it? And he would say no. And then we'd get scared because he'd hit us, and we'd get more scared and more scared and more scared. And the more scared we got, the less we could identify the tools. So we'd literally be running out with these tools and getting scared, and he'd be yelling at us. It just was terrifying the whole time. We also got spanked with a belt, even into young adulthood. And as a teenager, I still remember having to drop my pants and be naked from the waist down. And I can't tell you enough how that added to the shame and body image stuff that I was repressing without me realizing it. But I'll deal with that later in the videos. But I digress. He was also pretty regularly verbally domineering, condescending, and abusive. I remember again with my mom, she wanted to watch my little brother's game, or my game. I think it was my brother's game. And it was probably, I don't even know, like a mile. And I remember him telling her she couldn't go to the ball field unless she wheeled herself down. Now, I mean, think about that. Any of you who are men out there, think about you wheeling yourself, a mile or two down to the ball field to watch. And I just remember her being in tears and devastated. I also remember one of my best friends, in order to come over and spend the night with me and enjoy life, she had to make peanut butter cookies for him first if she wanted to spend the night. Now, in retrospect, honestly, I don't know if he was teasing or if that was really a requirement, but at the time, I definitively thought it was a requirement for him to come over. And my poor friend, wanted to come over. And so she did make good peanut butter cookies. But I mean, again, we're kids. That was, 7th grade, 8th grade. The other thing I remember too is, his favorite saying is, as we were watching something on TV, what do we have for a snack? And so what that entailed was literally us, myself or my little brother, going and doing a survey of the refrigerator or the shelves and coming back like a waiter or waitress and saying, here is your menu of choices. I mean, I'm being a little bit pat about it, but that's what we did. And inevitably, he'd want peppers and onions, which meant that you were missing your show, you were cutting peppers and onions, you were cooking it. Now, again, it's not really slave labor, but it was just, you were in the middle of the show. He wanted probably your chair, I don't know, but it was like an every night occurrence. I even tried to get smart and not tell him that peppers and onions are in there, but he always seemed to know. And inevitably, 4 nights out of 7, he wanted that snack. So you were, cooking him that snack. I also remember him, we had a little dog named Sport, cute little sucker. And I remember one day we woke up and he was gone. And we didn't know what happened to him. We thought he ran away. And so years later, this was maybe as an adult, I don't really remember how old I was. But I remember him telling us the story, laughing about, watching my dog Sport in his rear view mirror as he left him in the middle of the desert. And I can't tell you how devastated I was. The other thing that was a pretty regular occurrence is when we were actually laughing and having fun, he would come up and interrupt and say, if you don't find something productive to do, I'll find something for you. If I got all A pluses on my report cards, which, was not frequent, but happened a lot, and 1A, let's say, he'd ask why I got that A. Not, hey, great job on the A pluses. Why wasn't your A an A plus? Again, I'm just trying to give you some variety of stories. His holiday cards, you think, oh, great, he sends a card. He always sends a card. Fantastic. Well, that is the thought was nice. But what he wrote in the cards was so shitty, candidly, that me and my sister literally had to devise a contest. Now, this is birthdays, Easter, think all holidays. My sister and I devised, to deal with his shitty card writing, devised a contest. And we would total up points. So the shittier he was, the more points we would get. And so we would have a contest over the year about who had the shittiest card. It did go back and forth pretty much. I think I won fairly frequently. She might have a different scenario, but the fact that we even had to do that, but candidly, it made it more fun and you always opened it a day before your birthday because you didn't really want to feel shitty on your birthday. As I recalled some of these stories, as I was kind of taking notes for the video, and I'll tell you about my process in a minute about how I dealt with all these, but I was super proud of how I showed up, even as a terrified girl. I remember we had a trailer on the beach. He was a teacher and my mom was a teacher. And so, we spent our summers in North Carolina on the beach. I think it was 18 trailers away from the beach. It was the best summers ever. I remember that we had like a vinyl white counter and I was scrubbing it because it was a mess from mold when we got back. And I think I scrubbed it for like 2 or 3 hours trying to get this mold off. And he was so pissed at me that I couldn't get the mold off that he reared back and went to hit me. And I remember I just ducked. And so he hit his hand, behind me on the counter and really hurt it. Again, I knew I'd get in worse trouble, but candidly, I was going to get in trouble anyway, and it made me feel good about it. I remember they don't really have high school over in Saudi Arabia. They do, but it's British curriculum. And so the reason this is relevant is I was leaving for high school for 10th grade and going to a boarding school, so I knew that. So in about 8th grade, halfway through the year, I remember very vividly, he used to keep cash in different places around the house. And so I remember going and raiding his cash and having enough and he had these standby tickets, long story, but anyway, I had a ticket and I had my passport and I was ready to run and I had enough money and I knew my plan. And then I realized it had everything in hand, was ready to leave the house, go on the run, fly back to the States, disappear. And I remember as I started to implement the plan and had my go bag, I knew my mom and my little brother would have to pay for it. And I had 18 months left. And so I just put it all away and no one ever knew. Another story that made me laugh recalling this was we had palm trees. And so when we lived in like a compound, think of a base. And we had palm trees. And when you cut palm trees, you have to saw them and they have thorns. Anyway, we had 4 siblings. And I remember that we had to cut those palm trees, even though they had people in the compound that would cut them for you. I know it sounds fancy, but they did. And so I remember he went by pecking order, ages, and let my older brother pick the tree first, then my older sister, then me, then my little brother. Well, so of course, I mean, I would have done it too. My older brother picked the smallest palm tree, and then my sister, the next one. And then it was my time. And so me being me and knowing I'm going to get in trouble anyway, called the guys and told my little brother not to worry about it and had the guys come. I mean, I got in trouble, but candidly, like, what's he going to do? The palm trees are cut already. Similarly, in the compound, because we were expats, you could change out your furniture. And I remember for years and years and years, he had been saying, oh, let's get new furniture. Let's get new furniture. And, honestly, I guess I was just a troublemaker and knew I was going to get in trouble because I had decided long ago that I would. And so, one day they were all gone from the house, knowing fully well that I would be in trouble. I literally called and switched out all the furniture. And so he came home, and needless to say, I had to get all the furniture back, and I paid quite the price. But to be honest with you, I didn't care. It was my kind of way of being, rebellious, I guess. I told you about the story of the fat lip on Thanksgiving and wanting to go and tell people about it. I made a decision as a child, I think, that I didn't share with anyone. I wasn't going to let him win. I always knew that I was going to be yelled at or in trouble, but I was still going to go down fighting because you're going to get in trouble anyway. So as I'm thinking about this, as I'm recalling the stories, I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive, actually. So even through my devastation, dealing with the repressed feelings, I was pretty proud of myself as a scared, terrified kid to be able to do that. When I was in my 30s, I think it was, or early 40s, I remember being at a restaurant outside, and he had remarried to a lovely woman, and he literally at the outside table at the restaurant said to her, oh, I never touched the kids. Right, Shell? Well, here's the thing. I'm not going to poke a bear, but I'm never going to lie. And so I called him out on it. And he literally saw red. I don't know if he had convinced his wife that he never touched us. Who knows? Maybe he convinced himself he never touched us. I have no idea. But he saw red and literally reared back. And I remember at the time leaning forward and being like, all right, go ahead and do it. Because this time I'm not the same girl anymore. Either I'll punch you back or I'll get your ass locked up. He was so mad, he just went white. I remember it to this day. Again, I could tell so many stories, but I'll stop there and take a pause and tell you even then that I had angels without even realizing it. I'm going to talk about someone that he's the only one that I will use a real name for. He's passed now, and he deserves recognition. His name was Mr. Cop. And what he did, I'll always be grateful to him. Literally, Mr. Cop saved us. So I told you there's so many stories daily about us living in fear or getting yelled at or walking on eggshells or just not living a happy life. And Mr. Cop was literally Anytime we called him, and let me tell you, that was often, one of us would distract Dad, one of us would sneak up the stairs and call Mr. Cop and be like, Dad's in a bad mood, can you come over? And inevitably, every single time, that man was at our house within 5 minutes. I mean, he was like, not only was he my savior, he was like a second dad to us. He treated us like family. And of course, when he came over, Dad was happy as a clam, and his best friend. In retrospect, I kind of wonder if Mr. Cop was his best friend, or he loved us, or I don't know. But I've got to tell you, I never got to thank that man. I'm sure he knew, but he saved our lives daily. Not saved our lives, but he was an angel, and I'm so grateful to him. I told you I'd take you through my process of dealing with this. In order to do shadow work, I sat down by the beach and I did some meditation just to kind of, quiet my mind. And then I did a whole visualization of my father. It was on a picnic table. There's the jungle in Costa Rica, and then there's the ocean, and there's a picnic table there. And I literally never got to say these things to my father. Some of them I did, some of them I didn't. And so I literally did a whole visualization of him sitting beside me on a picnic table at the beach and having this conversation with me. Not only did I fully talk about all these stories and so many others with him, but I also talked about how thankful I was for the things that he did, that I did appreciate, his light, if you will. He taught us that education was the most important thing you can get in life. There were so many times that despite him and his family being pretty damn chauvinistic about women and their role in the house, he was still a huge advocate for so many things for me. He was super instrumental, if not the driving force, actually, in starting girls' sports teams in Saudi Arabia before we had them. We used to have to play on the guys' teams, which was fun. But I think he actually started all of those. And I think he did it for us. That's my guess. He also bought me a motorcycle because he knew how much I liked my little brothers. He always encouraged me to try new things and supported those things. He may not have been very soft about his approach and my learning curve, but he always did support those things. And the thing about it is, I know he loved us a lot. I never doubted that despite everything. As I was sitting there visualizing, talking to him, I admitted to him that one time during the summer, I talked about the trailer that we spent the summers at. Well, because he was a teacher, he had to fly back a couple weeks early to set up his classroom, and my brother and I mainly stayed with my mom. And they were the best times of our lives. He didn't leave us much money, but we didn't care. We sold lemonade to get macaroni and cheese. It was just heaven on earth. Anyway, I remember one summer, and I'm visualizing telling my father this because he didn't know about this story, obviously. We saw that a plane was hijacked from New York to Jeddah, where we lived, and we actually thought he was on it. And we were cheering because we thought he was on it. And we were elated because we thought he was on it. Honestly, I never felt guilty about that because honestly, that's how I felt about him. Now, his plane wasn't hijacked, and the plane that was hijacked everyone was fine, and they caught the guy. But I told him about all of that. I also told him about how things went when he died. Someday I'll tell the full story, but there was everything from his second wife, who I told you was amazing to him, is Thai, and so with her beliefs, for a while I thought that I was going to have to kidnap a monk to come play a gong in the ICU because she was scared his soul was stuck, and I wanted her to know that I didn't want her to worry about that, and that was the only way to do it. And then I talked her through it, and then I ended up lying to a priest because Um, I took her into get her some peace about dad passing, and he was cremated and he didn't have last rites because no one asked me. I was the medical power of attorney. And candidly, I just didn't even think about it. And so I was so concerned about her, the priest worrying her, that I kind of gave her a list of questions that she wanted to know, and kind of filtered those. I still feel a little guilty about lying to a priest. And he asked if there was a line outside the confessional, and I said no, and there was. All in a church, by the way, but I was so at my wit's end from 3 days of not sleeping. The other thing too was, we said he didn't want to donate his organs, again because of beliefs, which, I'm an organ donor, but everyone to each their own. And literally, even though we said that, and I fielded the phone calls, it was terrible. The night he died, I was up all night. Again, this is just, it's just real life. I was up all night, asking if we could donate his eyes, asking if we could donate his heart, asking if we could so every phone call was about his, each body part, and it just was devastating. Now, again, I said I'm a donor, to each his own. I know that so many body parts and organs are needed, and so I don't I'm saying this, and I don't mean to sound pat about it, but when you're grieving, having to answer 15 phone calls back to back at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning is probably not the best way to handle it. So anyway, again, the other thing is, he was very conscious of his teeth being in, and so when he passed and everyone was in we moved to the waiting room, and then she was very concerned about his teeth, and so understandably, because she was concerned that he cared about them so much, so she wanted me to get the teeth. Again, this all happens in loss. And so I had to walk in, and I started to grab his teeth, and I didn't really want to grab his teeth, and so I went back out and convinced her that he wouldn't want my brother and sister who hadn't seen him to see him without his teeth. It was really selfish. I just didn't want to grab his teeth. It was pretty creepy. But anyway, all sorts of things, some of them funny in retrospect, some of them devastating. And so again, we talked about that, and, I had a whole little visualization about that. And then I told him my process of thinking I had already gotten over him and his shenanigans. But after clearly what happened with Hadi and this devastation, and me not, acting like a doormat, not leaving so quickly after it started, I realized that, I hadn't dealt with everything, and my self-confidence needed some work, and he was one of the issues that I needed to deal with. I told him, again, no one knew these stories, but when I first went to college, I was so angry, like so angry. I remember hitting stuff. Like, I remember hitting a window one time. Didn't break, hurt my hand, but I just remember being so angry. And then I had a live-in boyfriend at the time for 5 years, and he was the most laid-back guy ever. And I remember he just, I'd get pissed and like slam the refrigerator or turn off the light switch or hit a lampshade or whatever. And I remember we were together 5 years, and I remember one time, I don't know, 4 years in, he literally got so mad at me. He took a beer bottle, he was just drinking a beer over a summer day, and threw it against the wall, and it just shattered. And I was so shocked that he did that. It just shut me up. And he's like, you want to hit shit? Fine, this is what it looks like. And honestly, it just completely took it out of me. It just solved it. It was so shocking to me to see that I'm so thankful to him for solving that. I also told my dad, again, a long story, but at 19, I cut him out of my life for 2 years and wrote him a note. I had just hit my wall of dealing with his bullshit, and I told him why. And I remember all of my siblings, to this day I don't understand why, got mad at me when I cut my dad out. Just didn't support it at all, would call me and ask me, why was I being mean to dad? But anyway, I told him when I cut him out of my life for 2 years, it was one of the best things I ever did. And I thought that I had dealt with it then, because when I brought him back into my life, I set boundaries with him and told him I wasn't going to let him treat me like shit. And anytime he started to say shitty stuff or act like an asshole, I would kind of in my head treat him like, Joe the plumber, someone I didn't know. It worked sometimes, it didn't work sometimes, it got in my head, but it was much better because he knew I wouldn't put up with as much crap. So again, that was at 19, and I thought I had dealt with this, and I'm obviously way older then. Now, I sat there during this visualization and talked about 100 stories with him, both good and bad. And I told him that I both forgave him and thanked him for everything, even the shitty stuff. And I knew I needed to do that for me, because you just have to let it go. And every single one of those shitty times were all lessons that built who I am today. Now, I'm not saying it was okay. I'm not saying that, it's something that I advocate for. I'm saying for me, I needed to forgive him. And for me, I needed to thank him, even the shitty stuff, because I wouldn't be who I am today without it. I thanked him for making me the strong person that I am, and the one who's usually, despite the situation with Hottie, fearless about taking on the world for justice and trying new things and traveling the world and fighting the good cause. Well, I realize now, at the time, for everyone but myself. I also had to tell him that I understood he did his best and understood that his flaws and shortcomings had nothing to do with me or any lack of love for me. I understood that he himself had dysfunction in his childhood, and that his actions and how he raised us were the sum total of both who he was, as well as his dark and light, as well as lessons he didn't learn. I literally thanked him for everything that happened, and I hugged him, and I told him I was gonna let it go now and say goodbye. I don't know how long this visualization lasted, honestly, but I pictured him walking across the sand into the ocean and disappearing. I literally felt like I was 1,000,000 pounds lighter. Sorry about that library announcement. I'm in the library. So I was telling you, I literally felt like a huge part of me had returned. And as weird as that sounds, I opened my eyes and the song Broken Halos by Chris Stapleton started playing in my head. Now, I don't have permission to use this song, but I won't play it. But let me share some of the lyrics with you, and then I'll leave the link in the description box of this video. So I've seen my share of broken halos, folded wings that used to fly. They've all gone wherever they go. Broken halos that used to shine. Angels come down from the heavens just to help us on our way. They come to teach us, and then they leave us, and they find some other soul to save. Don't go looking for the reasons. Don't go asking Jesus why. We're not meant to know the answers. They belong to the by and by. It's really how, when that song started playing, I realized it's really how I feel both about my relationship with my dad and what I had gone through with Hottie. But you'll see that when I get to the other videos later in the series. Without both of them, I just truly wouldn't be who I am today. And as weird as this sounds, I am truly grateful for that. Truly, truly grateful for that. All right, until next time.